Welcome to the PB&J podcast, where we talk about topics and issues relevant to the church today. Before we begin this episode, be sure to be sure to subscribe, and also share this. It really helps with the channel. We really appreciate it. And also leave a comment, either down below or through social media or through email, if that's your thing. We'll have the information in the description. Let us know what you think about this episode, and also let us know if you have any ideas about what you'd like us to talk about. And with that, we're glad you're with us on this episode. Let's jump in.
What up, Doc? Good to see you again, man. Hey, Sylvester, I had the first question, and I wanted to kind of go over it. I was mulling on it after we did our last recording, and I was thinking about what we could do to like really kind of further the conversation. And we had a really long talk, and for our listeners, and just for you to recap too, when we talked about like what is like the goal or the end game. Goal is the wrong word. End game, right? Of liberation theology, right? Or Black liberation theology, excuse me. And you talked about like, and I was like, hey, is it possible it kind of wants to work itself out of a job? You remember what I was talking about? Do you remember that conversation a little bit?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad you remember because it's a little fuzzy for me.
Yes, sir.
But one of the follow up questions I had is because I tried to study more about Dr. Cohen, and truthfully, like a lot of what he says really resonates with me. Um, Found out he follows
Mhm.
Bart, who we actually reference Bart quite a bit on this podcast, especially when we did our How to Read the Bible section. Um, but one thing that I am critical of Bart about, and then I want to talk to you about, and I want to see like maybe how you could either like explain this to us or maybe correct my misunderstanding, is that like one thing Bart does is that he really truly individualizes the gospel. What I mean by that is that it becomes for him, he uses the framework of an existential proposition, so interpersonal conflict and proposition. So he's right in the sense that the faith is contextualized to you. I think everybody who has the experience of faith says that. But what I think Bart doesn't do as well, and this is just my opinion, and I know there's a really staunch Bart
Mhm.
listener that's going to grill me in a text when he hears this. So Matt Logan, I'm ready for you. But what I think Bart doesn't do super well is I don't think he always like explains the experience of the church, capital C. Right. I don't think he necessarily accounts for the capital C church as well, because I think he's optimistic in the sense like most evangelicals or Protestants in general are, right? That like after
Yeah.
you become and like the Holy Spirit will guide you and the church will kind of conform automatically. One thing that I've been challenging
Yeah.
myself with,
Yeah.
Sylvester, is seeing the church as a body and me as like a participant in that body, but to see the church as a whole rather than me as an individual. So I'm thinking more of a group rather than me individually as part of a group. Do you think that Black liberation theology allows for
Mhm.
that kind of thinking? Because it seems very specifically contextualized to the Black experience. Having said that, am I misunderstanding it? Because I know the whole point is to create room for the Black experience in the church. But I guess I'm trying to understand, like, okay, like how do we do that? What does that look like? And then once that, if that can happen, which this is America, so I'm a little skeptical, but if that can happen, like what is the next phase for Black liberation theology? How does it assimilate into like our more traditional structures, or can it, or like who has to move basically? Does that make sense? My question making any sense to you?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
You
And I, um, and
it's a big
I
one.
want to say, first of all, thank you for having me on here again.
And so good to have you back.
I presume that I did okay job, so thank you for having me back. But no, Jordan, your question, my word, is so powerful because the essence of the big C, that I think as modern day church we don't really take into a lot of thinking of this big C, of this universal church experience, right? So I think that's very important to bring up. Now when it comes to Black liberation theology and coincide with that, I think what James Cone, he would love for that to happen, but he's also at a place, well, he have gone on to be present with the Lord, but his study and his framework is saying that before we get there, we first have to deal with this,
Okay.
right? Of first being seen as equal status, not just in America, but in the Black church, because
Mm,
remember that for a long time we had the United, I mean, for example, the United Methodist Church, and we had to break that off into AME, the African American African American Methodist Episcopal.
Episcopalian, yeah, Episcopalian, I think church. Yeah.
Thank you. Um, but we had the AME Church because black pastors, black preachers were not getting ordained,
Wait, what?
and they were not being ordained or consecrated as bishops, right? And so you had Bishop Allen, who's the founder of AME, and who kind of, like I said before, Black Liberation Theology had a name. You had throughout Black history people who were doing Black Liberation Theology. You had
Mm,
Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
fair.
Be, you know, doing Black Liberation Theology. Even, and I'm probably going to shake some people up, but even Malcolm X was doing some form of Black Liberation Theology. And so you had these figures during the civil rights movement, John Lewis and so on, were doing Black Liberation Theology before Black Liberation Theology was even named. And one of the important to mention, because when we're talking about the big C, it's like, listen to the words of Martin Luther King, listen to the words of the civil rights movements. We are American. And James Cone said, we are Christian. We are a part of this Christian body. But at the same time, you have to see us as a brother and a sister, as a Christian brother
Mm,
and sister, and not give validation to those who decide to oppress us and keep us down in using the Bible. You
yeah.
see, so now when we talking about the big C, Jordan, we have to, and it's a word that I want to use, but I can't pronounce it right now, but we have to destroy not just the theological framework that was used to keep black people down. And we say, oh, well, Jordan, that was just in slavery time. That was just in, but you have to understand that it never stopped. It kept going. It kept going. And so now here James Conan said it's time to be liberated from that. So I guess a long answer to a short question is trying to black liberation theology is first trying to liberate the minds of the black people that we are not going into this big C cap in captivity and allowing the image of a white Jesus to be the dictator of
Your holiness and
our
piety.
holiness or
Okay.
our Christianity, or putting us in the box of saying, well, we have to act like this or we have to be like this
All
and
right.
we
Let me
have
try for
to, and also, speak loud that it's okay to be for social justice and be a Christian.
Yeah.
That we don't have to wait until we are in heaven, to receive our justice.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers somewhat of your question. I know it can
No,
go a
no, it
little
was
bit
really
deeper.
good. Can I ask some follow-up stuff? Ben, I don't know if I'm cutting you off, but I had some follow-up questions because I really like your answer and it helps me understand. And that's something because I want to learn more. And I will read Dr. Cohn's the Cross and the Lynching Tree. It's on my list. It's number 3 now on my book list. I have 2 books for work I have to do. So well, actually, then I have another personal book, so it's number 4. I lied. Sorry, not because I'm trying to kick it down, but I have to do things for work, and then I have one thing I've been meaning to read for a long time. Anyway, main point, Dr. Cohn. One of the things
Yeah.
I wanted to follow up with, though, that you said that I thought was really powerful is you're right. Like the oppression historically hasn't stopped, and I think you're right that the sense that like how do I even begin to say this? One thing that I think the church has really struggled with historically, and I think that they're going to continue to struggle with historically, and I don't know what the answer is because I've only begun to just really grasp this
Mm,
problem, is exactly what you just nailed down. And so I think that's part of the reason I'm so attracted when you're talking about Black liberation theology is that like we're really good at saying
mm,
your justice comes later, and yeah, the kingdom of heaven is here, not yet, and you can just get little tastes, but the extent of that taste we tend to like really be kind of skeptical about. um, I'm reading C.S.
mm,
Lewis's Mere Christianity for a Small Group in Church, which isn't a fantastic book, but it's a very good book. It's not perfect, but he's got a lot of good things to say. And
mhm,
one thing he talks about is that the way Christians should act in the kingdom should be, in some sense, extremely like conservative in terms of how we like structure our family units and how we like lead and care for each other in that sense, but also extremely liberal and how much we give. And actually, Ben and I were talking about this in our personal lives. We were just chatting one day, and we were talking about tithing. And then I was talking about like, how much did you give? And he was like, I don't know. How much did you give? And I was like,
Mhm.
well, C.S. Lewis just says give until more. And then I was like, well, what does that mean? He's like, well, he just says give until you can't. Until there's nothing left to give. And then I was thinking though about like how we think about the implication of that as justice in like our world now, and like the Black community in particular, right? Like my community should be giving until we cannot. And so you are equal. We should try to make sense, like try to bring about not only politically, or at least that's what I'm understanding about the movement, that we should be trying to advocate politically for that fairness and equality, but also as a church, maybe the
Yeah.
mistake that my people of my skin color have made, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Sylvester, is that we haven't tried to create that kind of like, what's the word I'm looking for? We haven't tried to like meet our neighbor and love our neighbor as ourselves. We've been pretty content to bring the neighbor in and be like, well, what's your cross to bear?
Mhm.
Just like my cross to bear is this. And when we all get to heaven, it'll
Mhm.
be fine. And like you can suffer now, and it's really patronizing. And I was thinking about that,
Mhm.
like about
Mhm.
the pervasive nature of sin. And Ben, I know you have some sin questions, so we can clarify this later. But you know, one thing that I've become recently aware of, or I'm trying to become aware of, is what we call corporate sin. So like the things that I buy, like, am I encouraging essentially modern day slavery over in third world countries where they have like small children working in
Mhm.
sweatshops for 12 hours a day for less than $1? You know what I mean? Just so I can have a shirt that's less than $10. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's insane, like, right? Like that,
Mhm.
like kind of like complexity of it. But like, if that's justice, then we'll think about what happened to my community. I grew up in Indianapolis, Sylvester. You know, I'm an Indiana kid. I'm a native Hoosier. You've actually been to my house and you know what it's like. But you've been to my neighborhood and you know
Yes, sir.
what it looks like. But you'll also see in my neighborhood is a
Yeah.
severe lack of people that look like you. And I don't mean that to be mad, because I grew up in a town that has historically been accused, as much as these records go back, of redlining, right? And it's fairly common that you can go to
Yeah.
Indianapolis, you can say that's
Yeah.
a white neighborhood, that's a Black neighborhood, that's a Latino neighborhood, that's a, you know what I mean? And they got nicknames like Hallville, you know,
Yeah.
Speedway, you know, Little Mexico, whatever.
Yeah.
But my whole thing is like, you know, maybe
Yeah.
if historically my church had reached out, the need for Black liberation theology wouldn't be there, and the contextualization. Man, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. Cut me off at any point and tell me, because I guess my follow up is this: that like, if that's the case, then what needs to be done to bring you guys into the church and to make that church experience equitable, and like what needs to change about evangelicals, especially white evangelicals, so that we can grasp the idea of liberation, not only beyond liberation from our sins, but what you guys are talking about. Does that make sense? Because like contextually, right, which is really the crux of what Cone is saying, the context of African Americans' experience, like I can't know that. And you know, please don't take this the wrong way. In
Mhm.
some ways, I'm glad I don't know that, but I also recognize the unfairness and injustice
Mhm.
in that, and I don't know what to do but except for wrestle with it and try to do my best to deal with the hand that I'm dealt, for better or for worse. I just
Yeah.
happen to get a better one, you
Yeah.
know, and it sucks. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. That's white guilt talking, I guess. Sylvester, you got to cut me
So,
off here.
uh, actually, I wanted to see if I'm grasping what Cohen's getting at. So correct me if I'm wrong, Sylvester. But that question is interesting to me when you ask, what do we have to do to bring you guys into the church? Because I feel like the point of Black liberation theology is more recognizing that they are the church already. And so it's more about how do we acknowledge that their presence is already here. Is that am I
I'm
getting it?
glad Ben could ask the question, because I obviously could not get that out.
It's okay.
But Ben, you took the words right out of my mouth.
Okay.
Right. It's the recognizing that we have always been a part of the church.
Hmm.
It's just you have not recognized that we were the church because we worship differently than probably you, or we might see it differently than you, or mm, it's the common conversation, which I don't want to get into much of tonight, but of this missionary type of work. Of when we talk about missionary work, are we are
In and
we
out, like a fast food restaurant. You know, let me come
yeah,
drop
it's
off
like
some handouts. I'm not going to actually create change or help you or actually love my neighbor. I'm just going to give you some stuff so I can
right.
feel good. All right, see ya.
Exactly
Let me go back to my neighborhood. You know,
right. Or okay, for example, I say this and I move on. And this is some to help put into context what I'm trying to say. My father-in-law, my wife, father is Haitian, and he was born in Haiti, and he was born in Haiti, and he kind of grew up in a actually Nazarene missionary type of field. That
Mm.
he's actually Nazarene to this day. Make the long story short, um, the some way it kind of bothered me looking at him or hearing him preach or things like that, because when I went to Haiti, I don't if you ever been there, it's hot. It is
Just a little.
scorching hot. I
I've been to
mean,
It's hot, dude.
it's hot. And you have black Haitian men walking around with suits and ties. Now, understand that the dress code is, that dress code is more European than African or Caribbean. So when he told me this, when you look at it, the dress code and the pastor got to wear a suit and tie, it came from when missionaries came over there, they told them, well, this is how you dress. This is holiness.
Mm.
This is holiness. Dress in a certain way. And not just, and please hear me, I'm not beating up on the Nazarenes. I mean, Pentecostals do it, Baptists do it,
Even
yeah,
Catholics
all
did it for a long time. I think they still do it
yeah,
some.
so it's just this form of missionary that are we trying to make them look like us, or are we interested in saying we're trying to really present the gospel for, transformation conversion, and it's that transformation conversion is to be a spit image of you. And that's the question that, black liberation theology, it really also works through is, do I have to, in order for me to be a Christian, do I have to look like Ben? Do I
Mm.
gotta, do I got to, do I have to preach like Ben? Do I have to do this and do that, do this, do that as Ben or Jordan? Um, can my experience as a black man give me this revelation of a connection with the gospel that you might not be able to relate to? And is that bad? Do we all have to have the same revelatory experience with the gospel in order to say Ben is Christian, I'm a Christian, and Jordan is a Christian?
Okay.
Hmm.
I'm tracking with
I
So
don't know, I don't know if that makes sense or
no,
not.
that makes a lot of
you. Oh, it's
sense.
so yeah.
It has me thinking.
Yeah, it's a lot to think
So
about.
um, so when you pointed out, and you're totally right, because I remember being in classes when I did cross cultural orientation, and then when I lived overseas as a missionary, like that was a big thing that they talked to us about. Was you have to be really, really careful in how you work in foreign areas, because you can very, very easily run the risk of, in the process of evangelizing and sharing the gospel, you could unintentionally be saying, in order to be a Christian, you have to be, whatever culture you're from. Which for us, like, you have to be American. If you want to be Christian, you have to be American, because that's the culture we know, and so we
Mhm,
can misinterpret things in other cultures, and
mhm,
you get into a
mhm.
huge thing. Um, so okay, so Jordan knows I'm a verbal processor, so we'll see how this goes. So
Are you
so
preparing
the
yourself for episodes
Reformation,
later?
I know I'm bringing the Reformation into this. So the Reformation was not originally an attempt to start different denominations and different theological systems. It was just telling the church, the Catholic Church at the time, hey, there's some messed up stuff here. You really need to consider this.
Right,
And but then, these other denominations and theological systems came out of it, which was not the intention.
right.
But then the Catholic Church had the Counter Reformation that we don't really talk about, where they said, actually, yeah, these are things we really need to look at. And they did. They took a serious examination, they adjusted, yada, yada. It almost seems like sort of a microcosm of that a little bit. And I'm
Mhm.
not trying to be diminutive, uh, but it almost feels like Black liberation theology might have started out as, hey, church, here's an issue that really needs to be looked at, really needs to be discussed, really needs to be addressed. Does it seem, I almost feel like there was a bit of a counter Reformation happening, because what you just said, I'm thinking like, yeah, actually that's what I was taught, was that did happen. And now we're really pushing like, okay, like you can't do that. We have to acknowledge that. Yes, that was something that we really have to think about. It almost feels like a bit of a mirror in that regard. So that's why I brought the Reformation, Counter Reformation. Um, so it just it's curious. Did Black Liberation Theology? Do you think it started off as actually trying to establish a separate theology, or was it just maybe trying to get the church to just consider these things, and then it maybe became a separate system of theology? I don't know. Is that a fair question?
No, it's a fair question. I'm laughing because James Cone was just trying to graduate from his PhD program. He was just trying to graduate from his PhD program, and through his research and his experience, that's why it's very important that people also look at James Cone, as we consider him to be the father of Black Liberation Theology, because I live right down the street of the seminary that he went to, Garrett Theological Seminary, where he had to deal with crazy racism here in Evanston. Was saying he was not smart enough. He give you a whole interview. Please look it up on YouTube. A whole interview about his experience of going through his PhD work of theology, systematic theology. So his he wasn't even under Black Liberation Theology, right? He was under studying systematic theology,
Mm,
and then from there Black Liberation Theology came out from his research and his study, and somewhat of his experience. So when you ask, was it meant to be what it is today? To be honest with you, Ben, I don't know.
mm,
I don't know, because when I'm just I have never talked to James Cone. I wish I would have. He came to up to Garrett Theological Seminary a couple of times. I missed him, and my heart still breaks that I did. And now he passed on. But so I never talked to him. I never had the opportunity to interview him. But I'm I'm trying to think in his shoes, and someone who is doing a PhD. Then in some way you want to say, well, he did it to make a movement, to make a separate theological training, because if you're doing a PhD work, the the goal is that your work is to bring transformation to the world, to add some type of value
mm,
to the world. Now, does he wish? I mean, did he know that it would arrive to this point? I don't know, but I do believe that his goal was to have his work, his study, to do some type of transformation thinking within Black and the church in as a whole.
mm.
That's how I say it. So I cannot get an absolute answer to that, but if I'm doing a PhD program, I mean a PhD, and I'm doing research and I hope that what I'm doing brings some type of added value to whatever field that I'm studying. Because if it's not, then what's the point of me getting a PhD? I should, just be doing that.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the PB&J podcast. If you like this episode, be sure to leave a like, also leave a comment, subscribe, and share. That'll really help us out. And let us know what your thoughts are on this subject. And also, if you have any ideas of topics you'd like us to talk about. If you want to reach out to us, you can on all of our social medias, as well as email. You can email us at official.pbjpodcast@gmail.com. And we will see you next time.